What's up guys, this is Desm101, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm really happy to introduce a new series that I've been working on, and it's actually a very big topic as you may or may not know. And so for that reason I'm just going to go ahead and start with a sort of small episode to begin with, and that's to set the tone and the foundation for the rest of the series so that we can kind of refer back to it when we go back and explaining these topics. So let's go ahead and get started. Surely, one of the earliest and most prominent genres of the emerging video game industry of the 70s and 80s was the spaceship shooter. It began with titles such as Space War and The Indelible Space Invaders. It captured the minds of gamers around the world, who pumped quarters into these and later games such as Xevious, Galaxian, Scramble, and of course, our beloved Gradius. Nowadays, we might call them 2D/arcade shooters, or shoot-em-ups, or even shmups. The genre today is still going strong amongst a cult following of gamers, though it doesn't enjoy the same level of popularity as it once held in the 80s. You might think that the background story is not very important to 2D arcade shooters, and in terms of gameplay it really doesn't matter much. But for the sake of history and curiosity, we can find that having an engrossing world and story can help fuel the mystique around a game. It can elevate it into realms of inspiration and timeless art in the minds of its fans and players. On May 29th of this year, Gradius celebrated its 35th anniversary, and it got me thinking, how did my favorite series come into existence? How did Konami develop the original, and what were they drawing inspiration from to come up with such a complex and rich world? The more I dove into these topics, the more fascinating and larger the bigger picture became. The legions of dedicated fans contributing to pages and pages of information detailing the world behind the game, the identity of its pilots and enemies that populate its seemingly vast world. And it is to this point I wanted to dedicate my new series towards uncovering and piecing together this concept. It is my intention to document most of the aspects surrounding the game and its ideas, not so much strategies and mechanics of the game, but the rich, detailed quilt of stories and characters whom inhabit this world, which even I have only begun to discover. And we can start here with the origins of the first game and of course the iconic ship, the Vic Viper. Before we begin, I wanted to make a note that while not directly part of the lore of the game itself, the development history of the first game gives us a more clear and complete picture from which to frame the lore within. The development story behind the creation of a game can really be one of the most interesting things for me personally, especially when you consider how much information regarding a game can be lost to time, since many developers remained anonymous during the early years of video game history, and not everyone can document their activities while working for a business. With that in mind, let's travel back to 1984. Arcades were back on the rise after the Western video game crash of '83. Games like Marble Madness, Tower of Druaga, and Super Xevious had released that year, and things were heating up in the competition. Konami, a prominent game studio from Japan created back in 1969, had released Scramble, aka Super Cobra, in 1981, and were looking to put together a sequel for the arcades that could bring in some solid sales numbers. Machiguchi Hiroyasu had joined Konami in 1983. He wasn't very experienced with video games in general, but he learned the ropes and was penned as the director for this sequel. He discussed ideas with his team and asked what they wanted to make. They decided to make a shooting game, also known as STG, that could rival and even surpass the huge hit Xevious by Namco, which was an iconic shooter. Since they already had some assets from the Scramble sequel, they decided they would repurpose these into a new game. For a year up to its release, the team refined their ideas and concepts into this horizontal shooter. The platform it was to run on was the new Bubble system, Konami's first 16-bit PCB that was a graphical powerhouse for its time. With this technology at their disposal, they were free to get creative with the designs and look of the game. They even wanted to innovate the controls too. Most shooting games used a 1 or 2 button joystick layout, such as in Xevious. One button would shoot bullets and the second one launch a bomb at the ground. But the team wanted to use 3 buttons in this case. This was to accommodate the power-up system, so the player could use this extra button to select exactly how to modify the ship themselves. The 3rd button would be used to select the power-up. Power-ups were still a new concept at the time, and were usually designated by a number or letter. Here in Gradius, the player would collect power-up capsules that would light up items at the bar at the bottom of the screen, which the player could select by pressing that 3rd button. The layout of the iconic power-up bar was inspired by the F keys on a keyboard. The power-ups included options, or floating objects that mimicked the flight of the player and effectively multiplied their firepower. A big innovation for the gameplay in a shooter. The other power-ups were speed-ups, double shot, missiles, shield, and a laser, which would replace the double shot since only one of these 2 types can be equipped at a time. The really helpful power-ups, such as shield and options, took several capsules to activate, while speed up and missiles were the first 2 you can select from. I should also mention that the player can select up to multiple options for their craft. The team drafted up unique, colorful worlds that the game could take place within. They provided tons of ideas for a deep and mysterious setting that would captivate the player. Each level would have distinct themes that would reflect aspects of this world: caves, moai heads, mechanical fortresses, and alien bio-worlds. The enemies have a good variety, from standard popcorn ships to walkers and antennoids. Most levels are capped off by a boss fight with the Big Core, a large ship firing multiple lasers with a central orb that must be destroyed. This became a staple of the series, as you probably have already heard someone say, "Shoot the core," if you're watching this video. It's precisely this ship that started the trend, and it was expanded upon greatly for future releases in the series. The moai heads have also become a staple of the series at this point, and Machiguchi Hiroyasu said they decided to put them into the game because they saw how Xevious included the mysterious Nazca lions from Peru in their game. The protagonist ship in the game is called the Vic Viper, although in the US manual for the NES port of Gradius it was called Warp Rattler. Localizations were known to rename lots of content at the time, so it's not unusual to see this. The ship design was likely inspired by popular movies at the time, including Star Wars and Lensman, the latter of which Machiguchi Hiroyasu has stated that the team all went to see, and spoke about how much they like some of the spaceships and effects such as plasma lasers, which would go on to inspire that power-up in the game. The Vic Viper is noted for its striking twin-prong fuselage, orange cockpit cover, and blue trim on the back wings. It's a very delicate craft, not able to withstand a single blow, so its pilot must be highly adept at dodging attacks. The Vic Viper has gone through many different versions, this model being referred to as BP456X, and we know that James Burton is the pilot of this particular version. According to canon, this version of Vic Viper was created by Dr. Venom, a longtime antagonist of the series, and someone who appears as the head of the Space Science Institute in the game Gradius Rebirth. But don't worry, he'll be getting his own episode. The pilot James Burton is of the Leek race from the planet Gradius, which itself consists of roughly 2 billion people. At the age of 17, James is enlisted to fight against the invading Bacterian Empire, him piloting a single craft alone against an entire alien force. His success at this task earns him the reward of rank of Special Captain. This is not the last time we will hear about Captain Burton. There is still lots more to talk about in upcoming episodes. Now onto the enemies, the Bacterian Empire, hailing from planet Bacterian. They are considered a malevolent force and are intent on taking over planet Gradius. A giant brain controls them, which James must destroy at the end of the game. An easy and anticlimactic fight, which has become a motif in the series. The bacterians are capable of creating organic fortresses that can spawn more bacterians, so they have a method of replicating themselves to increase their size and numbers. There is a large number to their variety. Over time, the bacterians and their leaders have changed and grown in complexity. For this game, it was actually Bacterian itself as the leader, which is a little confusing from a naming convention. Expect to see more details on their bosses and notorious enemy types as this series continues. Most of these details were not known at the time of the release of the original games, it should be noted. It's something that can be discovered in some of the amazing documentation that has been done in regards to the game, from instruction manuals and other official sources, and of course the fans. It's a testament to the thoughtful design that went into the original game, how it drove the simplistic shooter into a milestone of the genre and manifest into a huge world built around it. The original Gradius game did fairly well in the arcades, enough to merit a sequel of course. It came out in the US arcades as Nemesis, and the sequel Gradius 2 was named to Vulcan Venture for the US release. Over the years, ports showed up on various home computers such as the MSX and consoles like NES and PC Engine. As expected, there are some changes which were done from the arcade original, but overall, the experience remains mostly the same. As the name became more well known, Konami released compilations that included the original game, and now they can be found on some of the eShops for newer consoles. Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of Gradius Lore. Next time we'll be talking about Life Force and the Salamander series and how it relates to the lore of Gradius.